Welcome, everyone. It's terrific to have Governor Brown with us today. He needs no introduction, except we're grateful he's joining us in these tumultuous times, times that the nation has, I'm thinking of voting rights, the endless wars, and as I read about Barbara Lee in these last days, I remember we published an interview with her a day after she voted against the authorization to use military force, and she needed security detail for a year, but it was an important voice, as is the governor's. He doesn't need an introduction, but he was governor of California from 75 to 83, from 2011 to 2019, right, Governor? A stint
Yes.
as mayor of Oakland in the 2000s, 3 runs for the presidency in 1976, 80, and 92. I think you were also Attorney General. You
Yes.
were in the Jesuit ministry, which informs your thinking and your endless curiosity and the fact that you read 3 hours a morning. For decades, as governor and prior, he's been concerned with the nuclear peril. And when he left the governorship, he joined the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists as chair. He's also part of the Global Threat and a Nuclear Threat Initiative. If you don't know the Bulletin, check it out. It's best known and known for many things, but the Doomsday Clock, which annually updates the risks we face. And we're now closer to nuclear annihilation than we've been. The governor says he likes to deal with big stuff. And he doesn't like to think around the edges. And that informs not only the nuclear peril and his interest in it, passion to take it on, but the climate crisis, which as governor, he did an enormous amount. Of course, any politician is pummeled by both sides, attacking him to halt oil drilling in the state, rightly so, but he took some enormous steps at the state level when the national level was just paralyzed. I asked the governor, he doesn't like to deal in, he's thinking nuclear climate, but we're going to begin, Governor, with an issue that is on people's minds, because I think 20 days from today, there's a recall. And someone wrote the other day that apparently it's easier to qualify for a recall ballot in California than it is to see a Lakers game. And I want not just your prognosis, but is there a deeper reform that needs to happen, like recalling the recall? Because what passed in 1911, I think, as a progressive reform has been so deformed by the power of money and corporate power that it seems crazy as we sit here. You got 46 people running. Larry Elder, there's a mayor, I think, of San Diego. But what's your sense of it, and what do you think of the recall generally and the strategy?
Okay, first of all, it's easier to go to a Lakers game than to qualify a recall. Only
a bad pundit would say that.
It is about the second recall in California history. It takes 12% of the voters who a number of people who voted for governor in the previous election. So I've always thought that is a tremendous barrier, and it has been. A couple of things have changed. Number one, there's so much money flowing into politics, and the money can buy circulators who will go around and collect signatures in supermarkets and what have you. So this is a paid operation, and the kind of money that's now available in politics was not even thinkable 50 years ago or even 30 years ago. So that's what circulates it. And then the polarization, the antipathy, the hatred, the absolute fervor of politics now, particularly on the right, gets people very excited about the mask and the whole dealing with the COVID, and then the progressive politics of Governor Newsom. So it's a combination of different things, some of the things he did, but mostly it's the times and that we're in. So that's where we are. I feel confident that Newsom is going to beat this. But as far as changing it, you'd have to submit it back to the people. It would take money to to get the signatures. No volunteer campaign has succeeded that I know of. It takes paid money. And then would the people vote to disable themselves from recalling people they don't like? At least they don't, 12% don't like. So there you have it. So we're going to live with the recall for a long time.
Moving to an issue that you care deeply about, when you were governor, you met with with Xi Jinping, and you've been following China for years. Do you worry about a new Cold War with China? Do you worry about Biden's policy at this time? As someone who's studied China, who's understands needed for addressing the climate crisis?
Well, I start in the context of being very concerned about the impact of modern, powerful technologies with imperfect human beings operating them. So we're in a world now with nuclear weapons, biological weapons, pandemic threats, climate change disrupting countries and food supplies, and pushing migrations. So we're in a very dangerous period. And so the old historical or 19th century nation state rivalry, now it's in the world of cyber, hair trigger nuclear. We have thousands or at least hundreds of ICBMs that are ready to go in a matter of minutes, and they can't be recalled. And we've had false alerts of the Russians. They felt we were attacking them. We thought they were attacking us. So we're in a very dangerous world. In that context, this rhetoric of we have to surround and contain China and fight their economic, military, or commercial expanse wherever we can. And we have to defend Taiwan, even to the extent of warfare that would inevitably escalate. Who knows how quickly it would get to a nuclear exchange, or if it would. Catastrophic thoughts here. So it seems to me, in the face of these horrors that are demonstrable from a scientific point of view, both at the level of climate disruption and at the level of potential war, we don't see the engagement, the dialogue. Biden and Putin and Biden and Xi have to sit down if we're going to work things out. And they got to sit down for not an hour, but for several days, just like Brezhnev and Nixon sat down for a long period of time to work out during the first Cold War. So yes, I do worry about a Cold War. I think the consequences could be catastrophic. And from the language coming out of Washington, it doesn't seem like they take it as seriously, certainly as I do. So there's an element, maybe a very strong element, of sleepwalking right on the brink.
As your close ally, former Defense Secretary William Perry, said we could be sleepwalking into a nuclear blunder. I wanted to talk to you about the media. You've been very critical, but in a, I think, constructive way. I saw a statistic the other day that in 2020, the three major networks, and most people still get their news from the nightly news, devoted 5 minutes to Afghanistan. So you can understand why there's shock at some of the images we've seen in the last week. But I wanted to ask you about the endless war, the coverage in the media, but also say that at The Nation, we've started a program. It's a project called Covering Climate Now, which I think in many ways addresses what you've talked about, which is deepening the coverage of climate. So covering the nuclear issue, covering climate, these are issues sometimes the media has not given much attention to. Talk a little bit about how you would address the media malpractice, so to speak.
We're caught in a technological morass of buzz bits of information at the rate of billions a minute all over America, all over the world. So it's a very different environment. I would cite two publications that are worth reviewing. One is Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, about how the media is biased in a very profound way. And an earlier book, more philosophical, more abstract, Jacques Ellul, on propaganda. In that book, this is a great French theologian, philosopher, says that a technological society must always be supported by massive propaganda. And propaganda can be true as well as false, but it does take over the thinking processes of peoples and nations. So given that, that deep distortion that these great thinkers have called our attention to, and now we're in the world where media empires rise and fall based on clicks. Advertising is the mother's milk of the media industry. So you got to get the money. You get the money by getting the ratings, getting the clicks, and you get the clicks by exciting people. Sex, war, scandal, surprise, novelty. This is what it's about. It's not about principle, tradition, the kind of the regularity of the good life. It's about the disruption of the good life. Fear, trembling. This is what is going to get people, not too much, but just enough to get them to click and to watch. And then you get the money, and then you can do more. So it's an addictive process that continuously escalates. And how you control that, I think that takes deeper minds than I possess.
Governor, I want to say that our clickbait is Noam Chomsky. It's one of the leading pieces we have in the last week, an interview with Noam Chomsky about the state of the media. And we are part of a lawsuit against Google because they're eating our lunch, and remnant advertising, which we need for independent journalism. I wanted to ask you about.
By the way, just for the record, I didn't understand what you just said, but that's all right. Just leave it there. Remnant.
Don't understand that Noam Chomsky is no. We have.
I understand what. I know Noam Chomsky attracts quite a lot of people. I'm finding, unfortunately, his relentless negative critique of America is all too true.
But I will say that he has some optimism in the Nation interview. We're not known for optimism, but Noam Chomsky.
No, he's
a little. But
right.
Governor,
whether his critique lays a foundation for optimism is a topic for another show.
I wanted to ask you, in June 1982, there were 1 million people in Central Park. It was an anti-nuke protest. Today, the anti-nuclear movement is not strong in ways you've lamented. The climate movement is strong. And I think much of that is a younger generation seeing the future. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you would bring these two together, because you've been involved with both of them, not as an activist, but as someone who cares deeply about both of these existential crises.
Well, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists displays what they call the doomsday clock, right, which the board, the scientific board of the Bulletin has set it 100 seconds to midnight, the closest we've ever been to catastrophic doom ever since the Bulletin was first initiated by Albert Einstein and other creators of the nuclear bomb. So we ought to be awake. And it's not just nuclear, it is climate and other disruptive technologies. This is the whole dilemma that we're in. If you think of it as a curve of rising technological power to destroy more quickly and more comprehensively, that curve is very steep and rising. The corresponding curve of wisdom is not rising. It seems flat. Now, so that means the gap between wisdom and destruction is growing, and we got to change it. We got to stop that and reverse it. And that takes it takes pause, reflection, prudence, and dialogue. And unfortunately, the big people, and I would say that's Putin, Xi, Biden, and the leader of England, others, at least I know these more familiar with their statements. They seem to be pretty happy with the way the world's working. They're very confident that the system holds. I'm not so confident. And thoughtful people who really look at it are not so confident either. And that's, I think, the great dilemma. And it's not just nuclear, it is climate. And the climate as it continues to deteriorate with 50 billion tons of greenhouse gases emitted, it's going to get to thresholds and tipping points that will make it enormously expensive to get back. And the social conflict, the disruption of people migrating is going to add to our political challenges. So yes, we got to link the nuclear with the climate and other threats so that we keep our mind on a more humanistic, down-to-earth concern about how are human beings doing and what are our governments doing to make the life of ordinary people better. That's where we got to keep getting back to. But we have all this ideology and this stuff, rules-based order, the new Cold War. They invent a lot of these constructs and then they beat us over the head like we got to go to war, we got to get ready, we got to deter, all based on these kind of outdated 19th century nationalisms. And the nation and others, I think, see through that, but we got to keep banging away because we're not making as much progress as we need to.
I say this not with levity, but it sounds like you're the realist and these people are moonbeams. I mean, you're the.
I would say so. When you're
I'm
sitting on an atomic bomb and the climate, and we're sitting here, I'm in West Colusa County, an hour from Sacramento in California, and the fires and the soot, the small particles that really create terrible lung diseases. It's all over the place. Now it's in Tahoe. Last week it was right here, from which I'm talking. So yeah, climate is here. The climate change, and the big people got to wake up. We got to stop the.
Do you think our system is capable? I mean, you've been critical of incrementalism, but you've also been a very pragmatic politician. Do you think we have time for incremental measures, or
that we don't know whether we have time? We have time because the horror hasn't happened yet, but we don't know how much time, and probably, tragically, we only probably respond to crisis like fires in California,
right,
like the Cuban Missile Crisis, like the pushing of intermediate missiles onto Europe. That created a big reaction. So just going along with rhetoric, it doesn't get you very far. It's in the face of catastrophe or near catastrophe that political will is mobilized. So the race is, can we get enough of a stimulus without being wiped out in the process in order to make the changes needed?
when you mean the stimulus, you mean the funding that's going through the House now?
No, I mean a wake-up call, like
Okay.
a close call, like fires, or like hurricanes, like the flooding of the New York subway. Do people wake up and go, wow, we got to do something? That's starting to happen with climate. It's not happening with the other,
Right.
the weapon of mass destruction. That's what I mean. You need real world experience to get through your complacency. We have deeply embedded patterns of thought. They don't break without powerful events that disrupts our thinking. We need that disruption.
Let me turn it over in a minute to Aaron, who will take questions, but we're soon on the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, a disruptive, tragic event. What do you think we've learned in the last 20 years? I mean, that has, I mean,
Well, I don't think we've learned the lesson. We haven't learned the lesson of American overreach.
right.
We haven't learned the lesson of responding. Okay, horrible event, the taking down the two buildings in New York. But then what's the response? Is it an invasion? Is it an invasion for a month, 6 months? Certainly no one would say 20 years and $1 trillion and 100,000 people dead and more wounded was the proper response. So we not only have to know what's the response, but how long do you keep going at this stuff? So have we learned the lesson? I don't think so. I don't think we've learned the lesson of Vietnam. I don't think so. We're in, I've read 800, maybe it's less than that, bases, or we're in actual shootings, killings in 7 or 10 different places. I mean, how can we even know what's going on? How can Biden or the Washington blob know what's going on? That we're overreach, we're all over with all this dangerous activity filled with passion and ideology and belief and religion. We need to constrain and focus our attention on the most important threats and deal with what's here in America, because America's coming apart. The fact that 40 million people, or 40% of America, believes that Trump was elected, the fact that we got the homeless, the fact that we have incarceration for 30 years, way beyond what is needed in most of the cases. We got a lot of issues here that we got to take care of, and we're squandering. I mean, between Iraq, did we learn I don't think we've learned the rest of Iraq. They're critiquing now this Quincy Institute because they want to restrain. Well, the people who are making that critique are very much part of the overreach challenge that America is now facing. And if we don't learn to get a wiser exercise of our power, we're going to get into the catastrophe. And this is not like a 1 in 100. The folks at Oxford, the Institute for the Future of Humanity, put out a book called The Precipice, in which they talk about Russian roulette, 1 in 6 chance of unrecoverable collapse of our civilization or extinction. So we're dealing with the ultimate wipeout, and we're talking like it's business as usual. So it isn't just the screw up in Iraq. It's many, many false assumptions that have led us into quagmires. And I think we ought to examine just what, let's rethink Vietnam. How the hell did we get in a situation where 2 million people were killed because we wanted to get involved in a civil war and we're afraid of the dominoes falling? We did the same darn thing in Iraq, Libya. We got messed up in Syria and we screwed that up. So look, there's a lot of good stuff. America stands for freedom and opportunity, but we're going to screw it up if we don't get much more fundamental change at the top in Washington.
So one final question. You're in Colusa County, I believe.
Yes.
On a ranch that your great-grandfather?
And my great-grandfather
founded
a stagecoach stop that had already been operating. His father was an innkeeper in Westphalia in Germany. He came over here and he set up, he took over a stagecoach stop. The stagecoach came by going to the mines and the spas, and he ran that, and he had 8 children, and his youngest daughter was my grandmother, my father's mother. So this is where she grew up. This is.
And you're a son of California. California has a great future. California is the first majority state.
California is a great future. It's turbulent, but there's a lot going on here. And this is a place of Silicon Valley. It's a place of a lot of cults. It's a lot of that lady who was shot in the attempt to take over the Capitol. She was from Orange County. So yeah, we got a lot here, a lot of the whole range. It's here. And can we manage? Well, stay tuned, take a look. I mean, I can't predict the future. I would just say that we need a lot more wisdom and a lot more prudence and pause. Let's rethink. We're not challenging. The big people, the Democrats, the people, and by the way, the Chinese and Putin, they go around thinking like they got the world in control. No, the software that controls the nuclear weapons is subject to failure. Climate is getting worse, and China, the US, and Russia are not doing anywhere near what they need to do, nor is California, for that matter. We got to mobilize far more political will to deal with these big issues.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Aaron O'Mara, the president of the nation. A position I said you vied for. You should have. You prefigured Bernie with your call number, didn't you? You always.
Yes, I did the 800 number. It worked pretty well. Okay. And I ran a more lean campaign, so I was the last one. I was the last one in the Clinton campaign, and we had those interesting debates.
Yes.
I was still on YouTube.
So lots of questions.
Lots of questions. Thank you, Governor. I just let you know we have people zooming in with us from Oregon, California, North Carolina, Texas, Hawaii, New York, Kentucky, Maine, Brazil. So thank you. We have a a large and energized audience. I have a question from Lisa. She says, we have elected officials in Congress still denying climate change, including some freshman reps and senators. Do you think the US can meet the challenges of climate crisis without leaders reaching an agreement on science?
No, we can't. We're going to have to get some Republicans with this filibuster and the limitations of that that budgetary process. We need some Republicans, and it does happen in California. A number of Republicans came down and wanted to do some legislation on climate, so it could happen. And I suppose this is my point about it's a race between the world changing, either through climate disruption or maybe some small nuclear war somewhere. Do we get enough real world event to respond? I think the fires, the floods, the hurricanes, it's going to turn the Republicans. They're going to get it. Now, are they going to get it in 2 years, 5, 10, and will enough? We don't have to get all of them, but if you can get 10 or 20, if you can get McConnell or get Lindsey Graham or a few of these other people who I think understand, that's crucial. So we do have to come together. I mean, it's one thing to say, we look at China and Putin and boy, they're running an autocratic one-man show. Well, we're running a Haley's Navy here. Nobody's in charge. It's all, Putin wants to, Biden wants to do something, McConnell wants to undercut it. We have to find a core of consensus or democracy simply can't meet the challenge.
You just mentioned California could do more. And I wonder there are states like California that can lead the way. What more should they be doing, and what example can California, for example, set?
Well, we have to accelerate the introduction of zero emission vehicles. And that's been set back by the recall of the Bolt electric car. That's a big problem, but we got to keep charging ahead. We've got to get to accelerate the zero emission cars and trucks. We got to get to that with hydrogen or in other ways. We also have to we're doing very well on renewable energy, but we got to get much closer to 100%. And doing that gets more expensive, technologically challenging. We need battery storage. We can't get more battery storage unless America and China and Germany and other countries invest and innovate. We've got to bring down the cost of storage if we're going to have a renewable source of electricity. We have to continue regulating sources of emissions. We have to increase the price of carbon. Very difficult politically. We have a low carbon fuel standard where the price of carbon is about $120 a ton. That's strong, but we also have a cap and trade program, which we have to increase the price of carbon in order to deter carbon industries. And we got to innovate. We got to make cement a lot less carbon emitting. We have to do all the things. And yes, we have to start reducing oil production, but at the same time, it doesn't do any good to reduce our own oil production in California when we import 70%. So we have to reduce the consumption quicker. That's all I'm saying. So, and is it harder? Did I do all that we could? No, I was prudent. I was working to be an effective politician, and I did things in sequential order. So there's many things that I didn't get done that need to be done now. Of course, it's easy to say that when you're not running for an election.
We have a question from the Nation's Sasha Abramsky. If someone like Larry Elder ends up prevailing in the gubernatorial recall election with a tiny sliver of the population vote, do you think the Democratic supermajorities in the state assembly and Senate will pass legislation neutering the gubernatorial powers for the next year, much as North Carolina Republicans have limited powers of Democratic governor there? In particular, they could insist that if there's a Senate opening, the governor appoint a new senator from the state party of that previous senator.
Well, I don't know how much good that would be, because there's some very strange Democrats. I mean, of the 5 million Democrats, you can certainly find a handful that will do exactly with what a Republican wants. Look, if I think Newsom is going to win, he should win. I don't want to think of the outcome, but it will be chaotic. And the legislature cannot run the executive. The executive, in terms of climate change, fighting fires, dealing with the problems of particularly prisons and the parole of people who have served long sentences, this is all within the jurisdiction of the governor. So the stakes are very high. And of course, we'll have another election very soon thereafter in the following November. So anyway, I don't want to give it any fuel other than to say it'll make California look like a farce.
I want to let you know you have some call outs of support in the chat. Grace wants you to know that you've been and are being great. And we have a question from John Lytle. With your intimate familiarity of the California constituency, wouldn't you agree that the nature of Golden State progressivism, were it present nationwide, would give you greater confidence in that the country could move ahead?
Well, look, the majority in Sacramento is not the majority in America. You can hypothesize that we could have a Congress like the California legislature, but that's not going to happen. Bernie Sanders only got 35% in the Democratic primaries, and the Democrats are 40% of the country. We're a very conservative country, and we got a conservative Congress. And the people who are pushing, like Nancy Pelosi, who's one of the most extraordinary political leaders we've had, maybe the best speaker ever, holding it all together. And she has lots of people who don't like her. Her numbers are more negative than positive. So we're in a funny world here that even when you do great, you're going to be vilified. So, and even with California, I'm not saying everything we're doing in California is transferable, or even if I agree with all of it. So anyway, that's what do you call those? Counterfactuals. That's only for historical teachers that don't have enough to do.
Michelle Willens is on the call. I think in the chat, she mentioned that she used to jog with you. And
Jogged with me once, maybe once, 40 years ago.
Well, she has a question.
Yes.
Looking back on your long career, where and when do you think you had the most impact? Oakland, Sacramento, first or second term?
Well, I think I had a real impact in Oakland in building up confidence, bringing in new people. Oakland grew for, I think, the 2 or 3 decades before I was governor. Oakland barely grew. Now, in the 10 years afterwards, it's grown by 40,000. Now, I'm not saying I did all of that, but I certainly brought a vitality and a common sense and a confidence that made people want to move to Oakland and invest. Of course, they were pushed out by the high prices of San Francisco, so that's a big factor. Secondly, as governor, I do think in climate, we were able to push further, a lot further. I didn't do everything, and I did work politically to be as effective as I could, but California certainly, through its coercive laws and its program, particularly the vehicle emissions, which now are the national standard, its electricity coming from renewable energy, we really did more than any other entity in the world, and I did champion that. I stood on the shoulders of those who came before me, for sure, but I would say those two. And I am always very hesitant to say what I did or didn't. From my way of the way I see the world, we're very much a part of a larger structure, a pattern of so many interactions, ideas, and forces, that what we do is very much the product of where we are and what are the forces at play. So one of the things for example, we never had a recession in my 8 years. That's very rare. Anyway, so I would say in Oakland, revitalizing, getting people to move in, creating a confidence and a common sense, because I can tell you, even though I'm basically a progressive, as governor, I signed 16,000 bills into law. And unfortunately, the only counter to the ravages of capitalism are more legal prescriptions and more bureaucracy. So it takes a balance here to use the powers of government, recognizing we all are the play of these historical forces. So that's my extended answer of what I did. I certainly enjoyed being mayor much more than I enjoyed being governor the first time, because it was local, it was real. You dealt with things on the ground like schools or crime, whatever. But I like being governor the last time because I finally had a real problem, a $27 billion deficit. So that was clear, and we made a clear response, and we benefited by the lifting economy. So that's that. And I'd be very careful to identify who does what, because we also are the plaything of historical forces.
Well, to sign the number of bills that you signed, it certainly required collaboration. I mean, where do you see opportunities for collaboration today? Are we more polarized than ever? Is this just a different time, same problem?
Well, I said I signed 16,000 bills because the legislature gave me more than, many thousands more. And I meant to say, convey the idea that we don't need all those bills. There's an over regulation. In some ways, in climate, we need more, but in others, we got to leave more space for people to make their life. Is there a need for collaboration? You bet. I tried to, yeah. And right now in Sacramento, the Democrats run things, so the Republicans are just faking it. I mean, they're there. They have no power. They have nothing to do except complain and raise money and get ready for the next election. So I think it isn't healthy to have that one-sided. On the other hand, I don't see the gridlock in Washington as better. So somehow, maybe through the recognition of crisis, our leaders from a variety of ideological positions will find ways to work together. Very important. I mean, there's so much suffering in the world that we have to transcend a lot of these differences that seem so important in America. But when you think of what we have, and then you think of the suffering in Syria and Iraq and Somalia and Yemen, all this stuff, terrible suffering, and America's causing, not causing it, but we're feeding it, and we're enabling to a greater or lesser degree. So I'd say consensus, very important, even though I don't know, it's more polarized, and I think there's a reason for that. There's some reason that people are getting more almost religious in their political convictions, and therefore they can't compromise. And without compromise, a pluralistic society cannot function. And without consensus, you can't have we the people. So we the people is not we the people from the left or from the right. It's supposed to be we the people. Well, how do you do that with such differences? And you do it when people can come together around important issues.
Thank you. I believe you've studied a lot of philosophy and Buddhism, and wondering how that informs your political view. And I'd like to add on to it a question from Kristen Cabral, who wonders how you think Pope Francis is doing.
Oh,
Well, I didn't study that much philosophy. I did study a lot of religion. I had religion. I was in a Catholic school from the 5th grade through my first year at Santa Clara. And then I spent almost 4 years in a totally cloistered Jesuit seminary in California. So I've had a lot of focus on religion. And one of the striking doctrines of the Catholic Church is original sin. And original sin holds that the human, the being, is as follows: 3 elements. The intellect is inclined to darkness, the will is weak, and the soul tends to sin. So if you think that, and without saying whether original sin is something real or not, I think there's a fallibility in human beings. I'm very impressed with that personally, and people I meet, and the world that I see. So if you understand the flaw that we all are, the flawed character of human beings, you can't run around like Tarzan wanting to run the world. That doesn't make any sense. You have to be humble about where we are. I mean, we're a country that, that had slavery, that has continuous inequalities, that wiped out the Indians, that stole half of Mexico in 1846, this trumped up war. So, and I wouldn't even go into the Philippines and annexation of Cuba and all sorts of things. We got a lot of great things as well. But with being so flawed, we can assume the others are flawed. They just have different kind of flaws than we have. So therefore, we should be not denouncing China. We can point out their flaws as long as we own up our own. I mean, we were responsible for 2 million deaths in Vietnam. I don't hear a lot of presidents saying, I'm sorry about that, or that was wrong. So as we look at China and their repression and how they're imprisoning Uyghurs and all the rest of that stuff, let's be aware that human beings are flawed. They've been that way since the beginning, and we ought to find a way to avoid even greater suffering and greater tragedy. And I don't think we're doing that anywhere near what we need to do. And so that's my thought. Now, I think there was another part of that question.
There, Kristen Cabral was wondering how you think Pope Francis is doing.
Oh, Pope Francis, yeah. Okay, I've just read his encyclical on brotherhood. It's from inspired by Francis of Assisi. He certainly's got the idea that he emphasizes encounter, dialogue. It sounds very much like what Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher who died in the 50s, what he had to say. Dialogue, very important. That's a key part of that encyclical. He's not in there singing beating the drums for capitalism or socialism, but human beings being brothers and sisters. Well, that sounds pretty, that's so far removed from the politics as I understand it, but it's good that he's there doing it. And even the Catholic Church, I mean, you got a lot of these people who were Trump supporters, and because of the abortion issue, they get all crazed over, they overlook everything else. So Francis is not well supported by probably a third of the church, but I would say he's on the right track. This encyclical has a very important idea that America and Russia and China have not yet got. And that is people of profoundly different views and cultures need to sit down in this age of destructive weaponry and talk and find a modus vivendi. That's Latin for a way of living, a living. That's all we got to work on that one, and we're not at the level we need to.
Thank you. Tatiana Maxwell asks, what do you think the value politically of Twitter and like platforms is, and does it move the dial positively?
I have no idea if it moves the dial. I personally find Twitter interesting because I'm signed up to different people like the Quincy Institute and a few others. And I find they'll put articles on there and I'll click on it and I can read it on my cell phone, which I do every morning. And I find that helpful. But this constant flow of tweets, I don't know, I put out tweets myself. I don't, so it's handy. I can see something. I read something last night and I can't remember, it was on one of these issues we're talking about, and I retweeted it, thoughts. So yeah, that's very interesting, to be sitting in your chair in remote Colusa County and being able to retweet an article that you think is pretty good. And then you may get a couple hundred likes, and that's good. And if you talk about puppies, I'll get 1,000 clicks. So I know what it takes to get the clicks. And it's not nuclear annihilation. I'll tell you, that is a big downer. It's much better if I show my dogs, Colusa and Callie. They are much better than dealing with nuclear blunder.
Erin, could I ask one quick question from,
Please.
this is a follow-up, Governor, about the project the Nation and Columbia Journalism Review founded called Covering Climate Now. We have about 400 news outlets around the world, from Times of India to newscasters in South Carolina, which I love. But it's a question coming back to the media. As a politician, a figure who's done so much on climate, do you think a stronger media role can play a role in encouraging leaders and citizens to diffuse the climate?
Yes, well, I can remember 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I had a press conference at Ames NASA campus there near Palo Alto. And
Right.
I had some scientists that had a declaration and a report by 1,000 scientists on the dangers of climate. And not one journalist who showed up would print one word. Everything they printed was about news of the day, and put that in quotes, news of the day. That is the God. If you don't fit it into news of the day, it's irrelevant. So that's why these fires, that becomes news of the day. Now we can talk about climate, or if the subways in New York flood again. Now, that's why I say, without these damaging events, we're not going to respond. And the only question is, how much damage do we have to suffer before we wake up enough and continuously to do what's needed, and to transform from a fossil fuel based culture to one that is renewable based and recognizes the habitat destruction and gets on the side of nature instead of being at war with it. Boy, that is such a change that it's going to take a lot of challenge, a lot of stimulus, and a lot of leaders. So yeah, the media, I think it's responding. That's what it does. It amplifies news of the day. And as the news, for example, what's happening in Afghanistan. Now that is a profound lesson. How can the greatest nation, in quotes, of the world spend $1 trillion in 20 years and have its whole army that it built up just kind of walk away, join the other side? I think we ought to think about that. We ought to live with that idea, reflect on it. What caused that? Not the screw ups on the exit. That's worth some thinking. But the big thought is, how could Bush, Obama, I don't know what about Trump, until Biden, stay in that place? The fact that Biden is getting us out with whatever mistakes are occurring is one of the greatest acts of statesmanship in view of the utter failure of his predecessors.
Thank you.
So that's news, but that's what that was the answer to your question. Can the media help? Well, the media is reporting about Afghanistan. Hopefully, that'll be the predicate for a lot deeper thinking.
And I do think there's a climate silence in the media. You talked about 7 years ago. So there's kind of a working in this collaboration globally. I think it's been that UN report a few weeks ago got more attention. Not enough.
Code Red for Humanity is what the UN Secretary General.
Yep.
But how does that work when, in order to talk to China, the rule in Washington is denounce first. So get the meeting, get it in an obscure place. Don't eat anything. Don't break bread. That's bad. Don't break bread with the enemy. And then start off with me good, you bad. Do you get that? Me good, you bad. Okay. Now let's talk about climate.
Yeah.
That's a loser, but that is the methodology currently being deployed.
Yeah. Over to you, Erin.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions. Grace Denise is asking about how to control fake news and hate propaganda, wondering if there should be a government agency to monitor fake news and hate propaganda, since it's fueling so many of our divisions today.
Oh boy, I don't know. Like, I don't even know that, Facebook can cut off a politician. Fake news is bad. We're going to have to deal with it. This business about the vaccine that these false prophets are disseminating, that's all bad. Look, we were based on the First Amendment. It expanded. It went from even a topless dancing was protected by the First Amendment because it was expression. So we've come a long way from what Jefferson was thinking about, whoever wrote the First Amendment. But somehow this information, cyber, digital, very powerful. And how, I don't have the answer to that. That's worthy of a lot of serious thought, because if you control it by the government, you're going to be, that's why President Xi, he got it. He wants to control stuff. He wants only what he thinks is the correct news. Same thing to a lesser degree Putin. So that's one pull. On the other hand, if you just let let falsehood and error and passion and hatred go, that's totally, that's catastrophic too. So I would want to defer here to more thinking, more reflection on how we do it. And I don't think, there may not be a good answer to this. Not every problem has a solution, or a good solution, or an immediate solution. So I think the nation can devote a lot more time to this problem.
Thank you. John Hawthorne is asking, says, didn't catch the name of the writer and book that you mentioned about propaganda. And I apologize because I didn't write it down.
All right.
Do you
It's
recall?
Jacques Ellul, Ellul, I think, Jacques Ellul. He's a Frenchman. He also wrote a book called On the Technological Phenomenon, a critique of technology. He was very famous in the 60s. But like everything, we become obsolete.
You talked about disruption being important to changing how people think and behave. Do you see any forces? We had a question about the Pope, for example. We've talked about states. Do you see any forces coming in other than catastrophe and destruction that are moving how people think and behave?
Well, charismatic leaders enter the picture. Cesar Chavez, in the face of historic failures to organize farm workers, did precisely that in the late 60s, early 70s. Who was he? He didn't go to Harvard or Yale. Very charismatic, informed very much by Catholic social teaching. What about Greta? She didn't go to Harvard or Yale either. It's had real impact. James Hansen has had impact. Martin Luther King, or different. So I think there's plenty of need and room for the charismatic individual. But what brings these charismatic individuals about? Is it doing well on your SAT exams? No. Is it getting all this education? Well, all that knowledge is good stuff. But one person I did spend a lot of time with, Cesar Chavez. And I spent some time with Mother Teresa. These people have inherent power. When I say power, their character, their being in their presence, I found moving, inspiring. I wanted to respond. So that's what it takes. I mean, Mother Teresa, she picked up a guy in the street, the first one. Pretty soon she has one of the most active organizations in the Catholic Church. Incredible, small, but nevertheless, the power. Chavez's union is come on hard times. But for that moment, there was real response. So we need another Greta. We need more of them. So I wouldn't in any way minimize what inspiration and an individual can do. Very powerful. Individuals do break through.
Thank you. Just ask one more question before I turn it to Katrina for a close. We have a lot of really invested and interested individuals on this call. So, do you have any advice or ideas for things that they should do to make a difference? And also, I wonder if you could share, where do you see hope, or where do you turn for inspiration in these times?
Good question. Boy, you gave me. Can you repeat those three questions? I can't even remember all that.
Yes. We do have a group of really invested individuals, and I wonder any words of advice for them, any suggestions for things.
Let's take that question first. Yes. Any advice for them? I'd say, well, I hope people don't get discouraged. I think you can tell I'm not discouraged. I'm full of zest and energy and wanting to deal with these issues, okay? Alive. Life is so exciting. I don't know whether that's chemistry, the mind, or whatever. So you have to build your enthusiasm, your zeal. You need zeal to overcome inertia and discouragement. Now, one thing, you can't do it alone. So you need friendship. You need very strong relationships with other men and women that can share your predicament, your perception, how your place in the world. So that's that collaboration, friendship. Those are really important while studying. Be informed. There's so much misinformation, and human beings are so flawed, and our intellects are inclined to darkness and error. So you got to stay skeptical. And how do you got to stay skeptical and yet zealous. So you got to get carried away, but every time you get carried away, you got to start, oops, oh, you know, I can't take it all 100%, because we're all full of error. We just are. I am, you are, the Pope is, even though they say he's infallible. That's just the way it is. Okay, second question. Who am I inspired by? Who am I inspired by? I don't know. One thing, this would be terrible to say, but I'll say it. This morning, when my wife was taking my two dogs out to walk, one's a little corgi, the other's a border collie and a poodle mix, okay? A bit of a mutt, but a deer mutt. Their tails, their enthusiasm, they were so encouraged to go on their walk. And I said to my wife, you see, these dogs understand the value of the ordinary life. And when I was in the seminary, we were taught to sanctify the present moment, sanctify ordinary life with goodness, and I could add greatness. So that's why, and I don't want to say it's my dogs that inspire me, but you know what else inspires me? I mean, the oak trees, they're surviving without water. They're losing their leaves, but they're hanging on. So life inspires me, people. And yes, people that I read and think about and meet, but reality. What I remember, I had a very Jesuit, it wasn't a Jesuit, he taught at Santa Clara philosophy, named Frederick Wilhelmsen. And he turned out to be a kind of a conservative philosopher. I didn't know that at the time. But he said, don't tinker with existence, celebrate reality. I don't know what the hell that means, but I was very inspired by it. Celebrate reality. And with that, you will have the zeal to continue. Persevere. My great-grandfather, August Schuckman, left the port of Hamburg in 1849. The name of his ship, which we've identified, was Perseverance. Perseverance. So that would be the banner that I would fly here.
So,
yeah.
Governor, thank you for this remarkable conversation. You have given us zeal and passion and the idea of perseverance. There are not many who've come on our Nation Conversation series who've talked about being the plaything of historical forces, who've given us French philosopher reading. And there's a humility, I think, that you bring to this conversation that we would all be wise to bring, as you suggested. We're all flawed. The mini lecture on original sin, I think, is important. But above all, thank you for persevering in these times. I know that you often despair because what gets amplified is not what you care deeply about, but the perseverance is part of the world you've shaped, and that we hope to be part of with you on this, the nation taking up the existential issues. But thank you for your ruminations, your wisdom. I think you are the realist, as others go off to the moon. You were called Governor Moonbeam for many years, but there's a realism that you bring.
I call it planetary realism.
You see, I was trying to give you a good situation, and now you're talking about planetary realism.
Right, because realism often seems rather cynical.
Well,
but
I agree.
You need a certain dose of that cynicism, but a larger humanism and understanding.
Humanism.
Yeah, you need a human, but you need also this larger perspective, because like it or not, we're in 800 countries with our soldiers. We're affecting the climate. We put more carbon emissions than any other country in history. So we got a lot of implication, a lot of responsibility.
But what you said about charismatic leadership, I think, allied with the forces of history. What you said about Cesar Chavez and Greta, I think that is critical. But aligned with the forces of not just disruption, but perseverance of history. And
Okay,
being on,
I want to add one more.
please, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, so we have two views. We have Carlyle, heroes, about heroes and great men. That's Carlyle. He wrote that great book on heroes that I read in high school. Then we have Tolstoy, the last chapter of War and Peace, where the generals don't know what the hell is going on. Soldiers are running up and down the hills. It's kind of chaos. So between Tolstoy and Carlyle, we have to think through here what it's all about. But I do know that charismatic people make an impact, and we need more of them.
Thank you for making an impact and for closing with Carlyle and Tolstoy. And may you join us again, I hope, and be part of our conversations. And thank you all for coming to this remarkable conversation. And may your dogs inspire.
Yeah, well, they do.
May
Other
your
beings-
land inspire.
That's
And
yeah, that's Buddhist. Think about other beings, other species.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.